Everybody has their favorite Beach Boys songs or albums, but if you're like me, you could never pick just one. I find that my list of Beach Boys favorites changes every single day. So let's look at the question in a different way. What is your least favorite Beach Boys album or least favorite Beach Boys song? There are some very common answers to the question, what is your least favorite album? Of course, the top answer, 1992 Summer in Paradise. I have a whole video on Summer in Paradise. A lot of people don't like it. I think a lot of people who really hate on it online have never actually listened to it. I don't think it's quite as bad as everyone makes it out to be, and I talk more about that in my video. My least favorite studio work from the Beach Boys, 1996's Stars and Stripes Volume 1. Stars and Stripes, some people don't even consider a Beach Boys album because they sort of do a supporting role on each song while a different artist does a countrified version of one of their tunes. A weird choice, and it feels a lot like a Transparent Cash grab, and it's very forgettable. Probably my pick for it. Another name that comes up quite a bit, 1989's Still Cruisin'. Someday I'll do a video on Still Cruisin'. I still like the review online that says, I can't give this a good score because it's not even a full album. But I can have a good time with Still Cruisin'. I think the new stuff on there, someday when I do a video on it, we'll talk more about it, but the new stuff on there definitely sells the album. So if someone asked me to pick my least favorite, that I could do. Released digitally in December of 2015, my least favorite Beach Boys album, The Beach Boys Live in Chicago, 1965. Although this release was digital only, a couple of the songs here and there had popped up on previous releases, notably on the singles collection, which featured CD singles for many of the group's early songs. The live version of 409 from the second show on this concert set is included. It's actually an edited version too. We'll talk more about that when we get to 409. But that was previously released. On the 2001 anthology disc Hawthorne, California, we saw the version of Shutdown from the first show. There are two different shows on the Live in Chicago digital set, but that one version of Shutdown had been released. And on Made in California, which I'll hold up for you, we had an unrelated concert intro teamed with Al Jardine's version of Runaway from the first show as well. So we had 3 songs from this concert set previously released already. But other than that, it was all new for Beach Boys fans in December of 2015. There are 2 different concerts. The first from March 26, 1965, the second from the 27th. The first show has 16 songs plus an intro. The second has 18 songs plus a spoken word concert intro there. And this follows in the vein of many other live releases. The previously released Live in Sacramento 1964, which celebrated Beach Boys concert and used a lot of the outtakes from those Sacramento 1964 tapes. That had come the previous year. And a couple that we've already talked about. You can watch my detailed analyses of both the 2016 Graduation Day and the 2017 Live Sunshine releases there. And one that we've talked a little bit about when we did a review of Beach Boys Live in London from 2018, there was On Tour 1968. But at the end of the day, most of this stuff was brand new. And these Chicago concerts, conceptually, are very interesting because this is one of the last documents where the Beach Boys are definitely pandering towards a child and teenage audience. You know, a lot of songs that young people would have liked, not songs that require a lot of production or have a lot of depth, that kind of thing. Indeed, we see many songs that we already listened to on the concert LP. Remember, the concert LP had come out in 1964 to great success, becoming the first ever live album to top the charts, and remaining one of the best-selling Beach Boys albums of all time for quite a while. And its legacy is certainly felt. By today's standards, it's not as well liked as some of the later live albums are, because there was a lot of, pulling songs from different gigs and remixing them and things like that. But we definitely get a glimpse of what the audience wanted and kind of what the Beach Boys were doing in 1964. We see a lot of songs that kids were crazy about, like Long Tall Texan and The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. And you can tell that with these Chicago shows, They definitely took a page from that. We see a lot of similar songs, or the same songs, I guess I should say. Songs like Hawaii, the Monster Mash, Johnny Be Good, there's Kapapa Oo Mau Mau, those kind of songs there the Beach Boys are still doing in their live set. Some of which would stay for a while, like Johnny Be Good would be done throughout the 60s. Others were kind of starting to be phased out, like by early 1966. Monster Mash was about done, Papa Oo Mau Mau was about done, that kind of thing. But for the most part, still a very kind of kid or teenage friendly set. And that, I think, gives us all the important reminder that concerts and live albums can kind of show us where the Beach Boys were and where the audience was at that time. We won't see the Beach Boys being pushed to be taken more seriously until 1966, 1967 and onward. That's when they want to start distancing themselves from surfing and hot rods in high school and that kind of thing. There are a couple interesting things, like they don't do Graduation Day. Graduation Day, of course, would come back to the set later in the 60s, but it was not done for here. And we also don't see Little Deuce Coupe or some of those other Beach Boys songs that were definitely being done live before. They kind of skipped over them. So you might say, why is this your least favorite Beach Boys album? And I kind of broke it down into 3 different sections. First of all, there are a lot of mistakes. Now, mistakes, even in live albums, aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think a mistake, or even a weird stylistic choice, can kind of bring some character to a performance. 1973's Beach Boys in Concert is usually regarded as their best live album. Mike Love completely flubs the lyrics to Surfin' USA. And honestly, that's alright. Gives it some character, the audience doesn't mind, the band keeps going, and it's still a really fun, kind of propulsive cover for the group. And, it's no great detriment to the album. Others, such as 2002's Live at Nebworth 1980, the Beach Boys try to use Cotton Fields as the intro to Heroes and Villains, and it comes off as really clunky. It's not a smooth transition. But again, it's very unique, very interesting, and the group doesn't let kind of some of the fumbles slow them down. My problem with Live in Chicago is rather than just 1 or 2 mistakes or odd choices, there are a lot of mistakes. And sadly, the bulk of them come from the man himself, Brian Wilson. Brian had somewhat quit touring on the road at this point. Glenn Campbell had filled in for some concerts, but Brian wasn't completely off the road yet. And indeed came back specifically for this concert, apparently because this was bound by Capitol to be Beach Boys in Concert 2, as Mike Love calls it during the show. I find that very interesting because Brian, especially during the first show, does not seem comfortable at all. During Don't Worry Baby, he completely messes it up, and the instruments and the backing vocals keep going, but his lead vocal stops. He forgets the words. He just lets everyone else kind of carry the song for a while, and he just sort of freezes. And then later he jumps back into the song and messes up again. This time he kind of saves face a little bit with some comedy. He says, "Hey, I wrote this song," and the audience thinks that's really funny. So he manages to save his second flub, but not quite his first one. It's really awkward, and it really slows down the show. But one flub, not necessarily a bad thing. I know I've flubbed plenty of things in my life. But then when Please Let Me Wonder comes up, that was not the group's most recent single, but certainly very close. This had been released just about a month earlier. Do You Want to Dance? We'll come back to that in a second. Was back with Please Let Me Wonder. So a new song and a very tender ballad, and Brian messes it up again, sadly. And this time he just kind of quits and stands there and lets, the rest of the gang kind of finish up the song. And that's a shame, too. 2 songs, both pretty important ones, kind of thrown off the track. Additionally, even though the more instrumental parts of the band, Dennis, Alan, Carl, do really well, a lot of the songs feel very sluggish and kind of chunky compared to something like Beach Boys Concert, where they're very streamlined. Notably, Hawaii, Wendy, and even Papa Oo Mau Mau all feel very strained. They're definitely slowed down. It just feels like the group is tired. Maybe they had to travel a lot before this gig and they just weren't ready yet, but it really shows. Such sluggish performances, not really anything that's a standout. There are a few really good parts. Al Jardine's Runaway is a highlight, and indeed he would later revisit Runaway several decades later, over two for that matter, for the Sun-Kissed album, they used a live version of Runaway from the 80s on this record. I have a whole video on this record. Talked about that one another time, but it honestly sounds really good here, even at this kind of early stage. I like that. Monster Mash, I think, sounds better than it does on the concert album. And Surfer Girl comes off really good, too, as they give Dennis the middle section. We could ride the surf together. And the audience really loves that. They love anything Dennis. And it sounds really good. I think Denny actually did a nice job. But for the most part, the songs feel slow, and the band just feels tired. And it doesn't help matters that Brian accidentally messed up two of their big numbers. I will say he only does so for show number one. Show number two, he's a lot better, and that nervousness and kind of that hesitancy is gone, and he does a good vocal on both of them in the second set. But the first set, a complete train wreck in the mistakes department. Another issue I have, besides the mistakes and the sluggishness, which I guess I kind of lumped together, is Mike Love. Now, Mike Love is weird. I've met Mike Love enough times that I can speak for that personally, and I've seen enough Beach Boys, concert film and stuff to know Mike Love is weird. He says and does a lot of strange things. But he can be really funny when he has a mind to. Some of his audience banter is pretty cringy today. Whenever a modern concert, when Surfer Girl comes on, he'll say, "This song is oddly gender specific," or that kind of thing, or jokes about being John Stamos' dad. That seems to be a thing. But other jokes he tells, again, even for modern shows, could be pretty funny, like when he says how this show is divided into two parts, the first part and the second part. And I can get into that, some good humor. But here, Mike Love isn't even trying to be funny. Most of what he says are these weird kind of stream of conscious anecdotes that make little to no sense. He talks at length about how the Beach Boys' pants are torn, and the tailor missed a few stitches, and apparently he's going to bend over and tear them again in front of the audience. He chastises the ushers for dancing repeatedly and yells at them about that and says he's going to tell their boss. All that kind of weird stuff. I don't quite know what the point is there. He goes on this rather long sort of, I guess you'd call it an anecdote, about this man whose brother lives in Chicago, but this man named Randy who recently moved to Los Angeles. Anyone know Randy? Because Randy's in LA now. It's really weird too. He kind of makes this joke about this girl who I guess was knitting things for the Beach Boys, but makes it sound like she visited their hotel room last night and gotten to know them all intimately. And I don't quite know what the story is. Maybe, again, on one of these weird tangents, he talks about getting his teeth filled recently, and I'm assuming he went to the dentist and they gave him some kind of very powerful drug that would maybe make him hallucinate, because I think that's the only way to explain some of this stuff. He is absolutely off the wall. His vocal performances are actually pretty good. He doesn't quite have the sluggishness that the rest of the band seems to have for the first show. But I don't know, when it comes to his banter and his comments, exactly what he's even trying to accomplish. These aren't even jokes. I mentioned in my review of their July 4th, 1985 concert that he was trying to sell all these really lame jokes, but just repeating the punchlines over and over and over again until eventually someone laughed. But these aren't even jokes. I don't even know what some of these things are, where he just kind of rambles. There are a couple parts that work. For example, he jokes about 409 and Shutdown being folk songs. That's kind of funny. He tries to get the audience to do this coordinated breath where they all breathe in at once and breathe out at once. And even though the audience doesn't really do a good job, it's a funny idea. I actually took that for an activity I did with 9th graders once. So, there's a couple good parts here, but for the most part, Mike Love is just off the rails. And next to the mistakes and kind of the sluggish performance of the band, it's definitely my third big strike against this album. There's also a little bit of technical difficulty with the recording. This is really only apparent at the beginning of the first show. The spoken word intro track and parts of Do You Want to Dance, it seems like they weren't wired for sound correctly, because we're only getting some of the music or none of the vocals, that kind of stuff. It's really weird and really uneven. Not a big fan of that. So just a few individual comments there real quick about show number one there. Besides Brian freezing and the sluggishness, Louie pops up, and for some people this is going to be a strike against it as well. Louie we talked at length about when we reviewed Best of the Beach Boys Volume 1, their first major hits album, or really their first hits album, period. And it was a big success, and a lot of people were highly critical of it as it featured their cover of Louie Louie on the track list. And Louie Louie's not a song we associate much with the Beach Boys. It was on the Shutdown Volume 2 album. I highly recommend looking at Steve Lewis and the Beach Boys Basement's video on Shutdown Volume 2. He talks at length about every song, and Louie Louie's no exception. And noting how the Beach Boys cover for that album is, pretty basic, and it's not well crafted. It seems like something that was pumped out really quick to fill up the album. But I gotta say, their live version, although it's not great, the kids in the audience love it. And I think it's safe to say that they went with Louie Louie, perhaps for that album and for this concert, just because they knew the kids would get into it. They knew their parents hated it, so that would make it even more popular. It was probably kind of fun to just get up there and make a lot of weird noises. At the end of the day, it's certainly serviceable. I wouldn't say it was even as good as Jan and Dean's live version from their album Command Performance, but definitely worth seeing there. And we also get kind of a finale where the Beach Boys are pushing kind of their classics and their biggest hits. I Get Around is the penultimate track, Johnny B. Good's the closer, but I Get Around gets quite a bit of fanfare. And Fun 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 is done near the end of the show. In fact, it's third from the end, which kind of prefigures, I think, a more modern approach where Fun 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 is either the encore, or the last encore, at least among the encore songs there. And we get into the second show, and the second show is much better quality-wise. We can actually hear Dennis really well on Do You Want to Dance, and he does a good job. Again, even though Help Me Rhonda was out, this would be kind of the group's big new single at the time still. Help Me Rhonda I don't think had quite taken off yet. And indeed, Al does Runaway again, but that would be replaced in the live set by Help Me Rhonda once that song caught on and shot to #1 and so on. 409 joins the live set for the second show. Again, that was the recording that was released on the singles collection. Interestingly, some of Mike Love's banter is cut off, or either that or edited out, on this CD single. And notably, Mike encouraging the people in the audience to dance, and some of his comments about "jerk it, girl" are edited out on that CD. So I don't know what he was doing. We can't actually see the show, but I guess the dancing was getting pretty intense. For him chastising all the ushers about dancing, it sure seems like he was trying to get everybody up and moving. The other addition for the second show, which the group actually does a good job on, is In My Room. And it has good harmonies, and Brian seems really confident doing this one. So it was a nice inclusion. That had been featured on the original concert LP as well. So that was probably one they were pretty comfortable doing live instead of some of these more unusual new choices there. They move Fun 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 up in the set, and I Get Around's moved up a little bit, and Papa Ooh Mau Mau and Johnny Be Good serve as the two kind of closing songs. But the audience likes that. Again, it's geared towards a kid audience. They can get up and get moving and have a lot of fun with that. And lastly, we get 4 rehearsal tracks. We get a Louie Louie rehearsal, which is actually pretty good. I'd say it's better than the version on the studio album. But for some reason, near the end of the song, Carl keeps telling Brian, "You forgot something, you forgot something." And I don't know if that just means he's not hitting his cues right, or if there's something that they needed that they didn't have. Seems really weird because it's actually a pretty good recording. I like the rehearsal takes of Little Honda and Surfin' USA. They're both better than the actual live tracks on here. And lastly, there's a version of Wendy, and it seems like the group was just kind of struggling a bit with Wendy, even though it had been in their live set before, but I'm sure that's a more difficult song to do live. But at the end of the day, the rehearsal tracks I think are actually the best parts of this, besides Al Jardine's version of Runaway. And, I had a good time with those. But overall, if I were to ever rank Beach Boys albums live in Chicago, go into the bottom. There's just too much wrong with it. It's not really a fulfilling listening experience. I would say it's my least favorite of all their live material for sure, and my least favorite of all their album material. Something that I only listen to when it comes up in my queue or when I want to hear a song here or there, but overall, pretty skippable. So please comment some of your Beach Boys live thoughts, or some of your least favorite Beach Boys songs or albums below, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.